Thank you so much for being here today. The whole goal of these videos is just to have kind of short chats with other people, and the hope is that whoever watches this might learn a thing or two that's new.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I appreciate that.
Jade, maybe we can quickly touch up on kind of how we know each other. That would be an interesting place to start.
Yeah, sure thing. What do you remember from the first time we met up?
I remember that we went on a hike in Greswell Forest, and that was pretty interesting. I remember seeing a very friendly guy, and I knew instantly that I wanted to be this guy's friend.
Thank you. So I'm getting distracted by a magpie. There's literally a magpie sitting on the
Yeah,
table.
he looks massive.
Um, really fortunate to have met my brother Arjun. And remember that after we met up in the high, and then we went straight for a trip to Newcastle, and we became very close as a result. So that turned out to be pretty good.
Exactly. Um, I remember we went to Newcastle, and I think that's when our friendship really flourished. Um, that's when I really had a good bond with you, and since then we've been hanging around together quite a bit, and we have common friends in our friend circle and things like that.
Definitely.
So, how was it for you when you first came to Australia? You're currently living in Melbourne. How was that experience for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been to this country for about 13, 14 years. Came here as a university student, fresh off from Malaysia. So I studied at Monash, Malaysia for the first year, and then I did a transfer. It was very challenging because of the culture difference. I really like it, the changes to it, like in terms of how education is being done even in colleges. I think people here are more vocal, they're more willing to ask questions. So that was something that I find quite difficult to sort of to integrate myself into. But over time, it turned out to be pretty alright. So I did. So I did an additional 2 years of studies here, and I decided that I want to become a teacher, and I did like a graduate diploma of education, and here I'm sitting right now.
That's awesome. So, what led you down to the path of teaching? I think it might be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about what kind of led you down to that path of teaching, and also what it's like being a school teacher in Australia. What's the education system like, and the whole education environment for teachers and students?
Definitely. So going back
Yeah.
to me being a Malaysian, like when I grew up, the way education is being done in Malaysia is quite different to the way education is being done in Australia. Like here the students see you as equal, not as like someone who is high up. So that was pretty challenging. But I think the reason why I became a teacher is I was very inspired by one of my teachers in Malaysia. So my English teacher, and I still remember that. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was in high school. But he really encouraged me, like very patient with everything that I do. And I decided that I want to be a teacher to really give back to the community and really make a difference in someone else's life, and then that was how my teaching journey began. Initially, it was very challenging in terms of students were not, they were not listening. You do need to be on top of the kids, especially in sort of like the Western world. But once you build, respect among students, like they have more respect for what you do, they know who you are, then it's easier for you to conduct your lessons.
And I guess in terms of what you teach, it's science,
That's right.
specifically chemistry. And how does your lesson structure normally work teaching at school?
So day-to-day class of mine would be, so we have a homeroom at the start of the day. I think it's pretty similar for schools around the world as well. So you have a homeroom, you do have students who just checking on their uniform, making sure everything's in order. So that usually goes on for about 10 minutes. And then you have a couple of lessons a day, depending on your schedule. So for me, I teach like science, chemistry, biology, mostly like middle school years. So you're talking about year 7 to year 10. Age wise is about 12 to 15. Um, but really trying to engage students, and a lot of the time that because of students disengagement, they don't have interest in the subject. The outcome is not great, but if you are able to change that, and that's something that I've worked on for many years, and you see a huge difference in terms of students wanting to be in your class, they want to learn the subjects, they want to be better, and there's a purpose for what they do, and there's a purpose for what you do, and there's a clear learning intention, a clear learning outcome. And I think that was really being built over time. It's very challenging for beginning teachers. Even myself, I had to go through that. friends who are being teachers. It's always very challenging to be in the classroom as compared to be a student. And talking about education in general is quite different from what happened in an Asian sort of context, because that's where I grew up as compared to the education in Australia. And I think yourself, you grew up in
Couple
very different,
countries.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I grew up in Bahrain, Egypt. Where I did my schooling was Dubai, Bahrain, Egypt, Fiji. And in Dubai and Bahrain, it was British system. In Egypt, it was American system. And then Fiji is Australian system. So very, very different. And I do understand how even the teaching styles were quite different. Like in American school, it was quite laid back. In a British school, it was quite strict. In Australian, it was like a mix of both. So I noticed how even within the curriculum, there's a lot of changes, and even the way in which teachers instructed students was very different. I'm not sure if you've also seen that across different schools in Australia as well.
It's yeah, it's I think in Australia it's pretty much quite similar, even though each state. So in Australia, each state has their own power to decide how education works. So in New South Wales and Victoria, there are some differences. In Victoria as compared to in South Australia, there's some differences as well. But in general, in terms of the curriculum, it's very student-based learning. It's all about the students. It's all about improving their outcomes. It's all about really engaging them in the classrooms. um, how do you find the system that you went through? Is there a particular systems that really stood out for you?
I think the one that stood out to me most was the American, and simply said it's just because you gotta wear whatever you wanted, and that was pretty cool. Sometimes wearing like a 50 cent T-shirt and stuff, and then football T-shirts and stuff. That's something that really stood out to me. And also in the American system, they were also really focused on a holistic education. So in the British system, I noticed how, like, for physical education, that would have the least amount of priority. But in the American system, for us, it was each subject, whether it's history, math, science, a language, physical education, a music class, they all have the same amount of attention. So they all have the same exact amount of class time per week, which is something I found really wholesome and refreshing. Because actually, students who are maybe not keen on math, but maybe more keen on theoretical or practical things, they can make use of that, and vice versa.
Hmm. Do you find that the system allows you to really
Yep.
like stand out, allows every kid to feel like belong in the classroom?
In a way, yeah, I'd say. Yeah, I think it allows kids to flourish based on their strengths. The
Hmm.
American system, well, at least what I know from the American system, which is where all classes have the same amount of time.
That's quite interesting because
Yeah,
as compared to when I grew up in the Malaysian system,
yeah,
and back then, I'm not too sure about now. I know things have changed over time, but it was very teacher centered, right? Teacher comes to the classroom, it's very traditional way of teachings, just talk to, and talk. So they will just write on the board. You're expected to listen. You're expected to be able to produce the results.
yeah,
And very often it's challenging because you have a class of like 50 students, and the teacher is just talking in front, and then you're expected to be able to get the results. And sometimes you may not understand what the teacher is saying. And when you ask the questions, they will be like, should I pay attention in the classroom? So it's quite challenging. I do understand why the system is being designed the way, and they do have constraint, especially in Malaysia being a developing country. They don't have a lot of resources as compared to in Australia, that there's a lot of resources being given to schools, teachers, and students. So it is quite a different sort of comparison. But I know that things have started to change even in the Asian context. Many Asian countries have started adopting many of these Western way of doing things, really uh, having connections with the students, having like group discussions, group sessions, group projects, which is something that wasn't being done much in the past.
okay. And I guess in terms of, for anyone that's watching, um, being a teacher in Australia, and they're maybe considering being a teacher in Australia, maybe they live here, maybe they live overseas. How would you describe the profession for someone who's a teacher in Australia? Would you recommend it? And what's the scope for career progression?
Yeah, definitely. I'll say at the end of the day,
Yeah,
you do what interests you. And Australia is a country that and across the world as well, there's just not enough teachers. So a lot of young people, they choose not to become a teacher for multiple reasons. And sometimes we do understand where they're coming from, because there's a lot of stress being associated with the profession. There's a lot of negativity in the media as well of how teachers are being portrayed across the world. So I think it's very important as a teacher myself to be able to convince others or to be able to show the positive image of what teachers do, and we do wonders, right? I have students many years ago. She became an optometrist. I met her at the mall just a few weeks back,
Wow.
and we had a good chat about the education that she went through, and she still remember, the experience. There's a saying by a lady called Maya Angelou. So it's saying that you people forget about what you say, they will forget about what you do, that they will always remember the experience that they went through. And I remember I became a teacher because of the experience that I had when I was young. And I think that's very important for us teachers to be role models. Also for the schooling in Australia, to be able to show the positivity and what the positive things that is been happening across schools in Australia, because there's many things that has been done, and unfortunately it's not being really reflected in the media at this stage.
Okay, that's beautifully articulated, and I think some of the most powerful people I remember in my life, most influential, were actually my school teachers. So I think you don't actually realize the impact a school teacher has. And I think you obviously have had a very big impact, because I remember you showing me all the cards and gifts that your students have given you. And it shows just how loved you are, not only by students, but also by fellow colleagues. And you've made a tremendous impact. It's clear to see. So I think that dream was definitely fulfilled.
Definitely
Um,
appreciate that.
and you were talking about kind of how a lot of people are skeptical about being teachers. Would you say that at the same time this kind of gives a lot of job opportunity or job security for people that might want to be school teachers in Australia? It's quite easy to secure a job and maybe even maintain that job, longevity in the career.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. I would say there's a lot of opportunities out there for
yeah,
those who are keen to become a teacher, but you have to be sort of prepared for some of these, negativity that's happening, or in terms of job progression. Um, Usually, like, it start off very quickly, like your pay goes up quite quickly, but it sort of like stays the same. So some people may not want to take it as a profession. And there's a reason why in Australia there's a huge dropout rate after 5 years, for example. So many teachers will stay on for like 5 years, and and then they find like the workload is just a bit too much to cope with, and that wasn't something that they want to do for the rest of their life. But I would say it's definitely good for someone who wants to try out the profession, who wants to give back to the community. Very often we found that teachers who have been in the profession for many years are those that really care about what they do, they care about the students, and they really want to leave a positive impact in the community. And a lot of times, like, even the things that I do as well, you do leave very positive impact. You may not see that in the short term, but over the long term, you do see the huge difference in terms of the community. I have parents who actually come and just have a chat with me, right? And talk some of their kids many years ago, and I met them, somewhere just in Melbourne, and we had a good discussion. We became friends. I became friends with many of these parents, many in the community. So if you really want to leave um, a huge impact in the community, or you want to make a difference in the society, I would say there is a profession that you can consider of joining.
okay. That's beautiful and probably very encouraging for people who are looking to maybe explore the prospect of being teachers in Australia, especially when you talk about job security and the appreciation that you get generally from students and parents. But obviously, it is quite a tough profession, right? It's quite demanding, but you do still get your holidays, don't you?
Yeah, so we do get school holidays. So usually you get about 8 to 10 weeks. Um, it's quite controversial to say it's school holiday because some people may think, no, teachers are just having breaks, but very often we are actually preparing classes. Like I remember, like many months ago, even during the COVID period, many years ago, we have to teach online, so everything was locked down. Like you have to be teaching on Zoom. It was very challenging. You have to change the lesson plans, and very often each lesson you actually need to spend at least a couple of hours to get a very good sort of comprehensive lesson plan, because you need to always be thinking about what you want to teach, how do you want to teach, how do you cater for different needs in the classroom. If the students are struggling with a concept, for example, I was teaching a lesson about bonding, so there was a chemistry class, and there were students who were having confusion about the different type of bonding, so that was a year 10 class. And the next session, I have to go and address the misconception because there were some difficulties that students were showing. There was a couple of misunderstanding of the concept that was being taught. So it's very important for teachers to be able to adapt to the situation and to be able to make changes to your lessons, because you can't be just teaching the same thing again and again, right? If the students are not getting the concept, if you try and just teach a different concept, which means that that area wasn't being addressed, or you try to just move on to the next stage, that's not going to work as well. So it's very important for you to adapt, and that adaptation does take a lot of time. It does consume a lot of your time as well, because you'll be constantly thinking about, reflecting about your lesson, thinking about how do you want to create a better lesson for your students.
Beautiful. And I think you also talked about, your cultural background. Talked about coming here as a Malaysian person and, some differences and I guess some adjustment, even that you saw on the teaching side of things. But I guess I thought it might be interesting to kind of touch up on your cultural roots. What is it like being a Malaysian of Chinese ancestry, or Chinese Malaysian? And what that side of your culture is all about? Are you in touch with those cultural roots?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I'll say as a Malaysian, in Malaysia is a very multicultural country. For those
yeah,
who do not know much about Malaysia, so it's in Southeast Asia. The bordering countries are quite famous. So we have Indonesia south, Malaysia, we have Thailand north, and then we have Singapore, which is just next door. It's a very multicultural country. We have like people from all across the world, mostly from different Asian countries, or because of the history of the country as well. So we do have like Malays, Chinese, Indian. So I myself, I'm a Malaysian Chinese. I define myself more of a Malaysian, because when I have been to China, and then when I go to China, people will be asking me, which country do you come from? So they
okay,
don't really see me as being from China. Um, it's the way I talk, or the people who I interact with. But I think that it gives me sort of an advantage coming to Australia, because Australia itself is also a very multicultural
yeah.
country. So being able to, make friends with people from different cultural background, be able to understand one another. I think it's very often the world is not at peace because people just, they just want everything to themselves. I think it's very important for us to really sit down and say that at the end of the day, we are all here, um, and it's important for us to be able to share our similarities and differences with one another.
Okay. Um, and in terms of the festivals, do you celebrate things like Chinese New Year and things of that nature?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, as mentioned, as a Malaysian, we celebrate all cultures. So, for me, I celebrate Eid. So that's the Muslim festival. I celebrate Christmas. I celebrate Chinese New Year. I celebrate Diwali or Deepawali. That's part of the Hindu culture. And I can remember when I was at school, we have like open houses. So every single festival, we will visit one another. So my friends will come to my place during Chinese New Year. I go to their place during Eid, and I still do that until today. Oh, I try to do as much until today. I think it really celebrates the richness of each and everyone's culture. Also staying true to yourself, right? At the end of the day, you know, I'm still very close of, I'm still a Malaysian, I'm still a Chinese, and it's very important for me to understand my culture as well. So I've also started to even brushing on my Mandarin skills, really trying to connect with my own culture and be able to explain to others. I remember, like, I think you came over to my place the other day, and we had some good nasi lemak. So
Yeah.
it's a Malaysian dish. So it's very important for me to be even to be able to cook for my friends, some of the, the Malaysian dishes, just for them to get to know more about my culture and the food that we have in Malaysia, and really celebrate our differences.
It's beautiful. And in terms of people who might want to visit Malaysia, what are some cities you would recommend? And also, not just that, but some of the famous foods.
Definitely. So in Malaysia, the must go places. So we have KL, that's the largest city in Malaysia, or Kuala Lumpur. We call it KL. By Malaysians, there's an island called Penang, and there's an island called Langkawi. So those
Uh,
are popular spots. There's also a very historical town as well. It's called Malacca. So just giving you a bit of context. So it was colonized by a couple of countries, the longest by the British. So we do adopt a lot of the British system. At the same time, we have, the different cultures, the Chinese, the Malays, the Indians. We also uh, at one stage we were colonized by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the Japanese. So there's just a lot of culture going on, and it's just great to be in such a country. And when you visit those different cities and towns, you get to actually have a feel of the history of the country itself. Just answering your question about some of the famous street. There's a very famous food street in Malaysia. It's called Jalan Alor. It's a bit too touristy. So some people go there, they feel it's a little bit, just like it's just a bit too much. Like the prices are usually um, at the higher side because it caters more to the tourists. But Chinatown is always a good spot for you to get like good and cheap street foods.
yeah.
So definitely there's a lot of places, and nowadays you have a lot of technologies online like Google. You can even use ChatGPT or AI, for example, just for you to find out what are the good places to visit or some of the foods that you can get from Malaysia. So it's quite easy to access this information nowadays.
Yeah, I know some of my favorite Malaysian foods would be kway teow, nasi lemak, mee goreng, and yeah, the one you made last time was nasi lemak,
There
right?
was nasi
That was
lemak,
beautiful, and roti.
and we had roti canai.
So it's a mix of Chinese, Malay, and Indian, right? Almost a
That's right,
fusion, some of them,
definitely.
which is beautiful and quite spicy. Malaysia is known for its spicy food, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. What's a good Malaysian restaurant you'd recommend in Melbourne for people to visit?
Melbourne. It's hard because now that I cook Malaysian food for my friends,
Yeah,
I'll definitely recommend my cooking in that
yeah.
stage. But there are some good Malaysian restaurants around. Can't think of a particular restaurant in this stage because each and every of them are good in in their own cuisine. But if you walk down to Chinatown, the city, you should be able to find some decent Malaysian food as well. There's also a lot of Malaysians living in some of these suburbs like Box Hill or Glenberry, for example, which is quite populated with Malaysians. So you should be able to find quite authentic Malaysian food. Usually there's a saying that if you walk past a Malaysian restaurant, if you see like there's a queue, which means the food should be pretty good.
Pretty authentic.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So we've talked about being a teacher in Australia, what the experience is like, the scope for growth there, and we've also talked about your Malaysian background, which has been very insightful. So we're pretty much nearing the end of the short chat, but at the very end, I want to ask you one question, which I normally ask everyone. One piece of advice that you'd probably give to anyone who's watching this.
I'll say
Yeah,
definitely it's very important for you to be true to yourself. I became a teacher because I really wanted to give back to the community and enjoy what you do. It's always important to have passion for what you do. Nothing can be forced, right? I mean, even for yourself, like the journey that you went through,
yeah, bro.
it wasn't being forced. Like you became who you are today because of your past as well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
because of the passion that you have as well. And how about yourself? Any exciting news? I heard there's some progress or anything you'd like to achieve in 2025?
In 2025, I'm hoping to just kind of like develop myself emotionally a little bit. I think 2024 was a bit of a challenging year, but that challenge obviously came with some growth. But I'm still looking to grow and learn from some experiences. Also looking to maybe be a little more consistent with these YouTube videos, especially with having chats like these. I'm learning a lot, and I know that other people are also learning because I'm getting some organic comments, which is really encouraging. So these videos are reaching some people who are interested in learning new things.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Jay, thank you so much for being here today, brother. Uh, I can't tell you how grateful I am that I know you and we're good friends. And I'm sure that anyone who comes across this video will certainly um, end the video knowing a thing or two that's new.
Definitely. Thank
Thanks
you
so
very much.
much. See
See
you,
you
Jay.
next time.